All right, we are on air. Duran live chat number 17. How's everyone doing out there? If you guys can hear me, let me know in the chat. Good afternoon, everybody from Cyprus. All right, thank you, Lydia. Duncan, hello from Brexit land, from Norwich, Brexit land. All right, we'll be talking Brexit for sure. We've got our in-house expert on Brexit. Hello, everybody. How is everyone doing? Welcome to the Duran live chat number 17. And let's get this going. We have a lot of news to talk about. And let's introduce our panel of super qualified, super smart experts. And of course, we have from Moscow, Mr. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk. Hello, Peter. How are you?
Great.
All right. And we have also via Moscow, international affairs and security analyst, Mr. Mark Sleboda.
President accounted for, sir.
All right. And of course, in London, we have the Oracle of London, editor-in-chief of the Duran, Mr. Alexander Mercouris. Hello, Alexander. How are you?
Hello, Alex. Hello from the Oracle.
All right, great. Let's get going. How's everyone doing out there on this Sunday morning, afternoon, night, wherever you are? Let us know where you're watching us from. It's great to have you with us. And let's begin. Peter, is Trump taking on the deep state? These are questions that people sent to us before we started the chat. What do you think? Is Trump taking on the deep state?
He's actually just changed. It's like an aquarium. He's just changed the water. What I think is that he will challenge the deep state only insofar as to protect himself personally and his presidency. He has, as chief executive, he does have the right to declassify documents. He's already threatened to do that regarding these FISA warrants. It's pretty obvious that British intelligence is hip deep in the machinations of the 2016 election. I think the more you look at the stories from reputable sources, you can actually pretty much connect all the dots. So he's got those cards really close to his chest. But is he taking on the deep state? No way, not at all. He's just, it's like an aquarium. He's just changed the water.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Mark? Is he taking on the deep state? Very quick.
Yeah, I think he might have had intentions to at one point in time. I think Trump was neutered as soon as they got rid of Flynn. As soon as he served up Flynn to them and got not a moment's of reprieve from the Western press, that was it. Game was over. Because Flynn, for all his faults, and there were many, including his work for the Turkish government, there were many faults there. But Flynn had served as Obama's director of the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. He knew the way the deep state worked. He could have helped counter it. He could have identified who and what needed to be purged. And that is exactly why the deep state went after him first. He was the first one gone. And once he was gone, then it was I think it was already game over at that point. And I said as much, I believe, on Crosstalk. You know, whether Trump has been converted, turned into one of the pod people, or whether he's just doing it all under the pressure, the potential of impeachment if the neocons side with the Democrats, and simply out of his depth with the neocons and the deep staters surrounding him, which is almost his entire administration. It's been said before, leaked from the press, that Trump feels that he's completely surrounded by enemies. I think it was Melania who said that, and it's true. He is completely surrounded by enemies. If it wasn't for his popularity with a significant percentage of the population, the 45% that holds out for him, they would have already gotten rid of him. I have no doubts about that whatsoever. The Republican Party is just terrified of the next election cycle, and I'm sure they're considering whether they can replace him if he's not already gone at that point. So yeah, I would have. We all wanted Trump to take on the deep state, but once Flynn was gone, he had no allies, no friends left who could deal with it. And then they removed everyone else. They removed Bannon. They removed everyone around him who had any type of like.
And then to make matters worse, they brought in Bolton. Game over.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was already over by Bolton. I mean, I was already dismayed enough when they brought in Mattis and Kelly, because that's the generals, right? That's the Pentagon brass.
Is that at this juncture, the generals are all but gone.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, we'll get into Flynn because there's a lot of news to discuss on the Flynn matter as well, and the FBI's handling of Flynn. So we'll get into that. Let's see. We had from Nbox said, traveling with GCT to Christmas markets in Germany and France. The goal is to talk to as many fellow travelers as possible to spread the word about the Duran. All right, guys, I'm saying that because we need your help to spread the word about the Duran. Smash that like button. Subscribe. Tell all your friends about the channel. Send us your super chats during this live. And you can also go to the Duran shop, 20% off all our t-shirts and merchandise all through December. Alexander, we have a couple of questions here before we started this live chat sent to us. And they're actually they're from Joseph and Antonia. And both of the questions are talking about France and Brexit. And so one of the questions is, any validity to the report that several French generals, admirals, and former defense minister signed a letter of warning to Macron, accusing him of treason? And connected to that, from Antonia, wants to know, what are the protests really about, and are they justified? And are we seeing a second referendum in the UK as well? So Joseph and Antonia package these questions.
Mark and I can take our dogs for a walk.
We'll be discussing that. Yeah, we'll be talking about France and Brexit as well in detail as the live gets going. But if you could answer those questions.
Yeah, I mean, the first one, I am very skeptical about this story that basically Macron has been threatened or challenged by the sections of the French military that way. That's not to say that there is much love for him within the French military. I mean, he sacked its chief of staff. He's talked about creating a European army, which I am extremely doubtful that the French military likes. But I think for the French military to interfere in politics in such a way, and to send to have generals and admirals sending a letter like that to Macron accusing him of treason, I think I would like to see a lot more proof of it, frankly. I mean, I don't know if anybody else has heard about it or seen it, but I'm skeptical. I'm very skeptical about this, to be frank. Are the Gilets jaunes protests justified? Absolutely. They are wholly justified. If you know about the situation in France, as I do, the situation there has been bad for a very long time, and it is getting getting worse. People are under a lot of pressure in France. What we've seen is growing economic and social divisions in France, with about a fifth of the population doing well and 1% doing extremely well, as we see in other places. And we see the rest of France coming under more and more financial, economic pressure. As taxes fall on it, it's now paying a disproportionate burden of the taxes. The economy is very sluggish because the government doesn't have much room for maneuver because of the way it's tied itself to the Euro project. And of course, people have a right to protest, and it's not at all surprising, if you know about France, that they are protesting, especially with a president like this. Now, I'm afraid I forgot what
the second referendum. Do you think we're having a second referendum? We'll get into Brexit in more detail.
I think it's possible. I think still the odds tend to be against it, but in this very fluid situation, after this disastrous visit, Theresa made it to Brussels, where she made a bad situation for herself much worse. I don't think any possibility can be excluded, but maybe we'll talk about that in more detail later.
All right. Another question was, what happened to the Friday afternoon chat? Guys, I was traveling, so we couldn't get that up. And I'm actually doing this broadcast from a hotel. So
I think we absolutely need a second vote, a second Brexit referendum in the UK.
I disagree.
In fact, we need at least two more. because
Come on.
because we need at least 2 out of 3 to make sure that that's really what the people.
Okay, you're proving. You're proving my point.
Maybe we should go for 3 out of 5. Or
All right, let's
I don't know, let's do 99 more referendums, and the first one to 51 wins.
I mean, Mark is making a valid point, but we'll talk about that, I think, perhaps in more detail.
Let's move to the chat, guys. Let's move to the chat and the questions we have. We have a lot of questions. Peter, this is from Duncan. If Christine Amanpour thinks that the social media were such a bad thing in France stirring up populism, why did CNN think that it was such a good idea in the color revolutions?
Oh yeah, well, this is rank hypocrisy, okay? Because they're CNN and other lamestream media. Well, they just parrot the ideology of the state and of the deep state. So I mean, that's what they're doing. They're not there to report. They're there to filter everything. I'm not surprised at all that she said that. That's perfectly in line with their ideological approach. They will, CNN and MSNBC, they've never disliked a war that the U.S. pursued and its allies. So don't think of them as terms of media. Okay, they're a conveyor belt of propaganda for the state. So if you want to know what the deep state is thinking, watch CNN, because that's what they're there for.
Very well put. Mark, we have a super chat from Luke. What the French is wrong with Juncker? And I imagine he's referring to Theresa May and Juncker's meeting in Brussels. And of course, I know Alexander's going to have a lot to dig into there as well. But Mark, what is wrong with Jean-Claude Juncker? I know there's probably a big, long list, but
what the French is wrong? Is that like
what the French?
Parlez-vous sciatique? I don't know. Yeah, so the official word is that he has severe back pains. I think the condition is pronounced sciatic or sciatic. Yeah, this is the excuse they always pop up. Anyone who watches him, and I'm sure, and we've heard from people that are in close proximity to him, the man is toasted all of the time, all of the time. I mean, what he has gotten up to this last weekend in Brussels with flipping women's hair behind their heads and tossing folders on the ground, and I mean, the man is an embarrassment. But that's what's great, because for Russia, anyway, having such a completely incompetent, ineffective, eccentric, drunk leader like that, I mean, it's almost like Russia gave Boris Yeltsin back to the EU, except they didn't have anything to do with it. So, what can we say about Juncker? Enjoy him. For those of you who are big fans of the EU army, just imagine Jean-Claude Van Juncker as your commander-in-chief. That's that's hilarious. But it's if he keeps the EU completely encumbered and neutered, I wish him many more years of power.
In a way, he really reflects what the elites in the EU are all about. They want to be comfortably numb as they go through this absolutely chaotic ride that they have created. Okay, give me another drink. Okay, I mean, give them double vision. Maybe they'll see something they want to see because they can't see reality. So I mean, he's a perfect metaphor. Comfortably numb. Okay, it's perfectly in sync with what's going on right now.
Alexander, Juncker and May.
This is how. Yeah, I'm glad you asked me, because that's what I was going to say. I mean, I thought actually that he was peculiarly effective and useful during this awful summit, which we just had, this awful European Council summit, because of course what he did was, perhaps he was drunk, perhaps he was sober, but he said to Theresa May, to her face, in her presence, what I think an awful lot of them were thinking, which is that she comes along, makes proposals, or at least appears to make proposals, and when you look at those proposals, you see that they aren't any kind of proposals at all. She's completely unclear about what she wants. And he said it. He said, you're being nebulous. And she was furious with him, and she stormed up to him, and there was this sort of situation where she was sort of grimly staring at him, and Sebastian Kurz had to come along and diffuse the situation. So I thought actually that was quite useful. And in Britain, of course, it's not been reported as Juncker being drunk or all over the place. It's been reported as Theresa May being humiliated, which I think she was. If you look at the context of what happened during that European Council summit, I think that particular incident crystallized it. And I would say something else. I mean, he did actually give her some pretty good advice quite early in the Brexit business. She said that she wanted to conduct the negotiations in secret, which in fact what she did. And he told her, absolutely don't do that. If you try and do that, you will end up with a deal which nobody will accept, and you will find yourself in severe problems. She didn't pay any attention to that advice. He then went back to Germany, where he spoke to his very close friend, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who is the president of Germany. And we were reading about in the German media afterwards, and it obviously originated with Juncker, him saying that Theresa May is on another planet and that she's really not very connected or realistic about this process. So yes, I agree with all the things both Peter and Mark say about Juncker, but compared to the absolutely hopeless leadership that we have in Britain, even Jean-Claude Juncker looks impressive. And that says quite a lot about the state of Britain now.
Maybe you can explain to all of us. I mean, after her humiliating performance calling off the vote in the House of Commons, and then she said she's going to go traipsing around European capitals. Yeah. What leverage did she think she had?
Well, she didn't.
That's just nebulous to me.
Well, of course it was. You see, the point about it, Peter, is that let's be quite straightforward about it. It was a lie. It was a deception. She didn't go to Europe in order to negotiate a new deal. She went to Europe in order to buy herself time. Because if that vote had gone ahead last Tuesday, she would have lost and she would have been forced to resign. Rather than face that, she put the vote off and pretended that there was a prospect of a renegotiation. So the whole thing was a deception from start to finish. There was no reality to it. And of course, she went to Brussels, to the European Council meeting, went through the motions of negotiating, but it was never real because nobody, and in fact, using the European Council in that way angered many of the people there, as it was bound to do, because they saw right through what Theresa May was up to.
All right, we have a £5 super chat from Afterglow. Peter, what panicked the globalists at Bush's funeral? I would imagine this is in reference to the media and all the uproar about Trump and the overcoat and how Hillary Clinton didn't look at him and all that stuff.
That's just silly. That's just silly stuff. You know, I mean, if you have the stomach, you know, watch an hour of CNN, okay? And I dare you, at the end of 1 hour, tell me if you learned anything. Were any facts mentioned? I'm sick and tired of Donald Trump this, Donald Trump that. He's on Twitter. He took off his coat. He put on his coat. He didn't shake this person's hand. Come on, this is silly. And don't be fooled by it, okay? Nobody wants to talk about policy. Trump may have bad policies, foreign policy-wise. They think he does, okay? But let's talk about the policies. All they keep doing is talking about the form. I don't care about the form. Vote for a female Klingon for president if that person can do it the right thing. I don't care.
Yeah. What about Peter? Tweety Bird is saying, what about Peter that during the service they were passing around envelopes and
yeah,
stuff
there was an envelopes passed to one to the Clintons and one to the Obama.
Well, what was that about?
They looked somewhat pensive when they got them. There's rumor mill going around. It might be subpoenas or something like that. Who knows? We don't know.
They would not be served subpoenas by them, okay? Anyone knows that, okay? Now, let's not look for a conspiracy when there is none here. I mean, the fact that an envelope was passed let's just leave it at that and not speculate. And most people that talk about legal things, and Alexander Mercouris will come in later, they don't know what they're talking about, okay? People in media, for the most part, by and large, do not understand the law.
All right.
What they do is they have an ideological bias spin on what something might mean. The whole Cohen nonsense proves that, and I'll defer to Alexander Mercouris on.
Let's get into it. Let's get into it, guys. Everybody, Alexander, let's have you kick it off. Peter, Mark, we have a lot to discuss there on Cohen and on Flynn, but let's talk about Flynn for a minute.
Yeah.
What was the FBI doing with Flynn? Did they entrap him? Was it a big setup? I mean, I'm sure all you guys have a lot to say about this, so let's dig into it a little.
Not only entrapment, but we know now that he was actively encouraged not to have a lawyer, that it would at that meeting, and that it was a friendly meeting. That's the indication they gave him. They knew all the answers to all the questions they were going to ask him, so it was hostile. Did he falsely remember? Yes. Okay, but so did John Brennan consciously, and Clapper consciously lied to Congress. All right. Flynn was, Mark put it best, okay? He was the early linchpin. Once they got him, then everything else started to fall in place. So he was trapped, okay? Now, again, I will repeat, Mark, a lot of his ideas, particularly like on Iran, remember when he came in to the State Department briefing unannounced and had this little diatribe against Iran, then it left. It was very bizarre. But, I mean, but what he did was far, far less than so many other of these characters that may never be prosecuted at the DOJ and the FBI. Mark.
I mean,
yeah, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so the entire purpose of people putting people on the stand, right? Whether it's in front of Congress or in front of the FBI with this type of political inquisition. The point is just to ask them provocative questions, to keep trying to throw them off balance. And the whole purpose of this Russia investigation is to create this neo-McCarthyite air of hysteria where they have a natural reflex to try to downplay small, perfectly legal interactions they had with a Russian diplomat or meeting a Russian at a bar one time or things like this. They lie about it and they get nailed on it. This is the entire purpose of it, to get them to lie about inconsequential things, which is exactly what Flynn did under oath, and then they can go to town with them. And the intention is to try to get them to flip, right? This is what they call justice in the United States, right? That you pursue someone on a completely unrelated matter and you promise a reprieve.
Like
Maria
Butina, the same thing.
You promise leniency if you'll say what we need you to say about someone more important that you're connected to. So this is exactly what they did with Flynn. This is exactly what they did with Papadopoulos. Manafort on taxes of his work in Ukraine. It's absurd. None of this, of course, even NPR admitted this week. NPR, there's no evidence of any Russia-Trump collusion because there isn't any, right? It's clear that that's not gonna stop this investigation, though, because Russia-Trump collusion is not the point. The point is to get them on the stand, get them to lie.
The point is
obstruction of justice.
The point is not to get to the truth. The point is to have an investigation. That's the point. The investigation is the goal.
To keep this atmosphere and this continual, sense of destroying the Trump presidency, putting it always up against the wall. That's the purpose of this.
Yeah.
Alexander, B-Dom says, I love the way Alexander talks. So Alexander, wrap up the Flynn stuff and also get into Cohen a little bit as well, Alexander.
Well, first of all, let's start with Flynn. I mean, the question was he entrapped? Now, I've been writing for months that he was entrapped. If you want to see my old articles on the Duran, absolutely he was. Now, can I just take you through that? Firstly, he has certain conversations with the Russian ambassador. He is the National Security Advisor designate. That is entirely proper and appropriate conduct. There is no suggestion that he said anything wrong or inappropriate in those conversations, which were taped. There's then a hysteria created around those conversations, claims, absolutely phony claims, that he violated something called the Logan Act. Exactly, Sally Yates. Phony claims, a hysteria that he broke the law by speaking to the Russian ambassador at all on a basis of an act that has resulted in no convictions and hardly any prosecutions in the 200 years of its existence. He's then told to have a meeting with the FBI. He's not informed of his Miranda rights, that, you know, he's got to be careful that whatever he says may be used against him and that he mustn't lie. And he's told not to have a lawyer. He says things about, which might have been lapses of memory, about whether he discussed sanctions or not. And what he said during that conversation with the ambassador was apparently on the subject of sanctions, he asked the Russians to exercise restraint. So he was actually working in the interests of the United States, but he may have said some things that were wrong. He then had all that information about himself with accusations he was lying, leaked to the media based on leaks of classified information deriving from the tape recordings of those conversations he had with the Russian ambassador, which he was not himself then shown. That, all of that being a catalogue of criminal offences, leaking, using classified information in that way to discredit someone, is a criminal offence in the United States. So was he entrapped? Absolutely. And he is entrapped, that Mark said. The whole problem Donald Trump had with the deep state was that he wanted, or said he wanted, to improve relations with Russia. That was also Michael Flynn's policy. Michael Flynn was removed from the picture in part because he was going to be the person who was going to improve relations with Russia, and he was also going to carry out certain very necessary reforms within the intelligence services. Since then, Donald Trump has not had alongside him the one person who could have carried out that policy. So it was a clear case of entrapment, and it has had a massive effect on the future of the Trump administration. Of that, there is no question at all.
Let's get into Cohen now, Alexander, and let's have everyone weigh in on Cohen and his sentencing memorandum. We did a video on this, which will be published after this live. From Flynn to Cohen, what do we have, Alexander?
Well, if I can quickly summarize some of the things we said, I think people are not reading those sentencing memorandums properly. They think that the one that was filed by the Southern District of New York, the district attorney there, somehow refers to Donald Trump as some kind of unindicted co-conspirator in a felony that Michael Cohen has carried out by paying off these two women, which was supposedly a breach of campaign funding rules. The indictment does not say that. It does not speak of any kind of conspiracy between Donald Trump and Michael Cohen. It makes it absolutely clear that the initiative for all these things came from Cohen himself. It makes it quite clear that the reason Cohen did that was because he was trying to enlarge his influence over Donald Trump, because he was hoping to establish himself as Donald Trump's fixer and that way wangle a job in the Trump administration, which he was hoping would be elected in a few months' time. It's also clear from those sentencing memorandums that Michael Cohen's influence on Donald Trump has been greatly exaggerated, including by Michael Cohen himself. And it is also clear that Michael Cohen is a crook, a fraudster, a cheat, and a liar, and that nothing he says about any subject should be taken as truth. That includes, of course, the things that he says about his connections with Donald Trump. Now, this is not my view. That is what the sentencing memorandums say. And I do wish people would read them properly.
Peter, what was your take on Cohen's sentencing memorandum and what's going down there?
Well, what my take was how the media reported it, and talking about this being a campaign violation. I'm not particularly convinced that that is true. Donald Trump used his own money, all right? And these were nuisances that were taken care of. I mean, I don't see how, I mean, it was a reputational thing, but that would be reputational irrespective if he had been a presidential candidate. So I'm not sure what laws were broken here. And I would really like to stress to everyone, campaign law in the United States is very complicated. And I'm willing to wager my bottom dollar that just about every campaign breaks some kind of rule. Oh, the Obama campaign did, and I don't remember the sum, but it was a significant amount of money that they had to pay in a fine. And these things are very rarely criminalized. These
Peter, do you think the Clinton campaign did anything illegal?
No.
Oh yeah, they rigged the primary. Never mind.
You know, that is just like that 900-pound gorilla all over the place. I mean, the Clinton corruption is so prevalent, so ubiquitous. You have to be blind, deaf, and dumb. But that's what the liberal media is, okay, when it comes to their crimes. Look, Flynn committed a procedural violation, okay? And that's all it was.
I should say something about Flynn. I don't think he committed any violation at all.
Well,
If Flynn had actually defended himself, I am pretty sure he would have been.
Look, I don't.
And that is why there is a recommendation that he should not get any prison time. Carry on, Peter.
No, I am agreeing with you. Okay, yeah. First of all, I think it's a fact that if you have engagement with the FBI, and I suppose in some kind of official capacity, you don't have to be Mirandized. Okay, you can't lie to the FBI. Okay, because that could turn into a felony. All right. So, but what it gets down to is that did he misremember something? It's very much like Jeff Sessions when Al Franken asked him, "Did you have any contact with Russians during a certain amount of time?" And Jeff Sessions said no. And that's what his big mistake was, because Al Franken, he's a comedian and not a very funny one. And now he's out of the Senate because he's a groper. Okay. But the question should have been more refined. As a Trump surrogate or as a U.S. senator, did you meet with a Russian? Those are two different questions. And if it had been more refined, if he'd say, as a Trump surrogate, then he might have said yes or no, depending on what was truthful. But because it was such a nebulous thing. And the same thing is with Flynn. Flynn, the thing is that Sally Yates made a big deal about this conversation that was leaked to the media, all right? Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to be charged for that? Is Sally Yates going to be charged for that? That's a felony. Okay, so
it's a very serious one, by the way.
The FBI knew everything, and Flynn, thinking it's a friendly conversation, might have just said. And he had the tendency to be a braggart. Said some things that are out of line. Should that be considered a felony? Should you lose your house, your career, your pension? When Clapper and Brennan lie under oath in front of Congress and they go scot-free and they are on cable TV, I mean, what's the sense of proportionality here? And Mark is just right. He described what justice is in America, so I won't repeat it.
Yeah, Mark. After you comment, Mark, can you also get into the hypocrisy side of it with Maria Butina as well, and what's going on there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Just real quickly. I mean, let's be clear. Cohen is one step up from an Italian ambulance chaser, right? You know, I mean,
Absolutely.
I mean, the man's a snake. So I personally don't care what happens to him. And you know, for once, you know, I'm perfectly with Trump and saying lock him up forever, right? Him and Clinton, and I'm all for that. But it's kind of ironic. Now, again, notice the pattern here. The supposed purpose of this inquisition is Russia-Trump collusion during the election. And we've got Flynn and Papadopoulos lying about inconsequential things that weren't actually illegal in any way, shape, or form. We've got Manafort and one of his associates on taxes. And now we've got Cohen on hush money paid to prostitutes, right? You notice what's missing in all of these things? Russia-Trump collusion, right? You know, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Alex. You may not know about the peculiarities of American election law, but I believe I have read that if Trump had actually paid these prostitutes hush money himself, it wouldn't have actually been illegal.
I think that's exactly right. The key point,
his own money.
Which just makes Cohen a very bad lawyer.
Well, a very corrupt lawyer. Because, of course, the key point about this is that the money that was paid to these prostitutes, as you call them, is in fact paid by Cohen. It was Cohen's money. He eventually got it reimbursed by Trump. And that's where people say that there's the campaign finance violation. Now, I want to stress this point because this is the key point about that indictment. Cohen committed, allegedly, a campaign finance violation, which he has pleaded guilty to. The indictment does not suggest that he was involved in a conspiracy with Donald Trump to commit a campaign finance violation. The word conspiracy does not appear in the sentencing memo. If you actually go to the regulations that set out how sentencing memos should read, it makes it absolutely clear there that where there is a conspiracy, it should be identified as such, even if the other co-conspirators are not named. So let us not take a sentencing memo that refers to a felony committed by Cohen and construe that as setting up a felony by Donald Trump. That is not what the sentencing memo says at all. It is Cohen who is alleged to have committed an offense here. There is no suggestion that Donald Trump did.
All right, a couple of super chats, and then I want to tackle the Maria Butina confession that she is a Russian spy. That is the latest news. We'll tackle that.
Sorry.
All right, Quecos, thank you for your $10 super chat. Bobby, thank you for your $20 super chat. News Boost, $5 super chat. I love you, gents. You're like high fiber diet, pushing the crap away to get to the intellectual news nutrients.
TMI.
Thank you for that. And we have a $2 super chat from Glenn Hunt. Flynn played along to expose the corruption. Guys, Maria Butina, Peter, is she a Russian spy?
Of course not. Okay, she was put into a position where they wanted her to sing and then to compose. She's been in confinement, solitary confinement for months after months, and probably a few more ahead before her sentencing. There was no evidence made public, at least, that she had any connections with Russian intelligence. There's no, from the reports that we know, made public, that no secret, confidential, sensitive information was passed on to anyone in the Russian intelligence community. She was an avid gun person, okay, and wanted to promote gun rights in Russia. Russia has very stringent gun laws, very stringent. It doesn't have the Second Amendment that the United States has. So basically, she has served her purpose. Her greatest crime is that she's Russian. That's what got her in trouble, and they tried to use her, first of all, to destroy her reputation. What is it called? Slut shaming? Yes. They destroyed her reputation, and then tried to make connections with other people. She was in the business of networking. That's what she wanted to do. She wanted to network with like-minded people in America to get them connected with like-minded people in Russia. That's all she wanted to do, from what I can tell. And so if she was a big supporter of guns, then she would probably want to get to know people in the NRA. This is a storm in a teacup. It's absolutely ridiculous. Another life has been destroyed just to create, like I said, it's not the goal. The finding justice is not the goal. It's the process of investigation is what that's their goal, to show that they have punished a evil doing Russian. No, they destroyed a young girl's life. You know, are they really proud of themselves?
Mark, her crime was being Russian. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear about this. How many of you have read in the news or you know, heard the Russian spy Maria Butina? Yeah. That has nothing to do with reality. That is fake news. She is not charged with espionage. She is not accused of being a spy. That is not what any of this is about. If you actually pay attention and read past the completely salacious mainstream media headlines. She's never been accused of being a spy. She's never been accused of having any contact with Russian intelligence of any sort. She is not being treated the way real spies like what was her name? Amy Chapman. Anna Chapman. She's not being traded. She's not being treated like this. She's cooperating fully. Real spies don't cooperate with, you know, that they're traded later. That's the way it works. She is being accused with a technical violation of an obscure law that has never been used until the modern day, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. It's something that every APAC lobbyist in D.C., all the lobbyists, they're guilty of. She is accused of being basically a civil society lobbyist. She is a gun rights nut, and I say this. You know, I'm from Pennsylvania. Right, I'm all fine with people having hunting rifles. That's the way it here is in Russia. It's actually easy to have a hunting rifle, but I don't believe in gun rights in this country. They have Russia still has a terribly high murder rate. Right, it's going down. It's related to the alcohol consumption, which is also going down. Both trends are on a long-term downward trend, but we don't want to send it back up. That's why 83% of the Russian population is against, you know, the free gun rights and a well-organized militia, you know, the Americans love so much. So she was a big gun rights activist here. She started up a gun rights group. She lobbied and cooperated with Europeans and with the NRA in the United States, none of which is illegal. She tried to get close to people in positions of power, right? Yeah. She tried to butter them up. Nothing illegal. That's what you do in the business there. She was initially accused of being a honeypot, right? Of sleeping in order. They dropped that charge completely and basically tried to, not quite apologize, but, the damage was already done in the media because there is no evidence of that whatsoever. In Russia, she was actually censored. Her internet page was censored because some of the posts that she was posting about gun rights in the gun rights in Russia were a little bit on the violent side, right? So they got tagged as extremist, and her posts got censored from LiveJournal, which for some reason, God knows why, is still popular in Russia. Now, does that sound like a Russian spy, someone who's censored, right, for gun rights posts, United States? She fought for gun rights in Russia. She found a much more receptive lobby, a much more receptive audience with the NRA in the United States because, well, she's a semi-hottie little redhead, right? Little redheads with guns. Everyone likes that in the United States, right? So, and she got full of herself. She made connections with some people. Her main connection in Russia is a guy who is a banker, a deputy banker. He has no real power, no influence in the Kremlin, nothing like that. He just happens to be a gun nut too. And this is what it's all about. If anything, she is far more guilty of trying to exert the influence of American society, the idea of gun rights in Russia, than she is of doing anything against the United States. That's the truth of Maria Butina.
Alexander,
no, I mean,
Alexander, before you answer it, tie it into a super chat question, which is connected to, it's going to be connected to your answer. I'm certain. Mike V asks, during the Cold War, defeating communism as an ideology was the goal for the West. How did Russophobia become foreign policy objective by the U.S. today? So tie that into Maria Butina as well.
Okay, well, let's first of all begin with Maria Butina. I mean, Marcus put it superbly well. Can I just add one thing? I mean, the idea that a Russian influence operation in the United States would start with the NRA, one of the most patriotic organizations in the United States, is, to my mind, so fanciful as to be completely absurd. I mean, if the Russians really wanted to start an influence organization, they would certainly not be starting there. There is no question she is not a spy. This is a person who has been treated by the US justice system in the most grotesque way in a climate of Russophobia, which is completely out of control. Now, how did it start? Well, I have gradually come around to the view that an awful lot of what I had once upon a time believed was anti-communism, that there was always a very, very high degree of Russophobia behind it at all times, especially, dare I say it, in Britain, where there has always been this strain. Where it comes from, what causes it, what is the underlying cause of it? Well, I think you need to go back far into the 19th century and beyond, and there are all sorts of cultural and other reasons. But
go back a little, guys. Let's explore this. Go back, everyone. Let's explore this a little.
Okay, well, let us go back. I mean, first of all, I mean, Russia is this very, very big country on the eastern part of Europe. It is of Europe and not of Europe. It is this strange place, far away. Very few Westerners speak its language. No British Prime Minister or Foreign Minister has ever spoken Russian. So there is profound ignorance in Britain about Russia. There's profound ignorance about the British population about Russia. I think that's also true in the United States. I think that is also true in other countries. They practice a different religion from the kind that we have, and their political system is different. So it is very easy in a certain mind to construe or to translate onto this country your own fears and obsessions and paranoias, of which there are many in the West. I think there's people are always looking to Russia as this ominous threat, which it never is. But these are cultural and geopolitical things going, as I say, way back to the 18th century and the 19th century. There are specific reasons now why there is this hostility to Russia. And the most important of those is, this is a big, powerful country which insists on having its own foreign and domestic policies. And that is something that many people in the political establishments in the West find extremely threatening, especially when it is done by a country which looks in so many ways Western. It is very unsettling to them because it goes against their own ideological conceptions.
You know, the thing is, if you can bring it into the modern era, I mean, today, is that if you look at what the neoliberal globalist elites are pushing, they're pushing an ideology, and Russia says no to it. Russia is a modern country. It's not a postmodern country. It believes in borders. It believes that religion has a place in the public square. And Russia's a country with all of those things I just said, and they can say no to the West. See, for at least in the immediate period, I kind of like the broad brushes of history, because this is we could do a separate chat on it. Is that you have to remember, in the West, they believe they won the Cold War. Russia believes that it opted out of the Cold War. See, those are the different historical interpretations. And in the West, Russia was defeated, okay? And so, you know, victory goes, the spoils go to the victor. Well, the Russians don't look at it that way at all. And as a matter of fact, if I go back to this modern perception, it's the Russians and it's the Chinese and other aspiring powers in the world that want the United States to go back to the modern world, to respect the United Nations Charter. It's the West, under the leadership of the U.S., that constantly is bastardizing those basic rules for the playing field. Okay, so I mean, and Russia can defend itself, and so can China, but the Russia is constantly used as the other. The West is virtuous, Russia is cruel. The West is modern, Russia is tradition. Tradition's bad, by the way. Okay,
barbarian, right?
Okay. And the hordes, you know, they're going to sweep into Europe. I mean, you get these. If you look, I collect political cartoons from the 19th century. And even in at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, even though Russia was on the winning side, they were depicted in the most backward way. Okay, because the West is forward and modern and virtuous and good, and Russia plays the role of the other. All the negative things that actually apply to the West themselves a great deal of the time. So Russia plays that role. We've had so many decades and centuries of preconditioning. People are conditioned to always see every Russian is a villain. I mean, Mark, you've quoted it on Crosstalk. Who was it? Was it Brennan or Clapper? That Russians are genetically Clapper. You know, Russians are genetically predisposed to deceit and dishonesty. I'm paraphrasing. Okay, that was somebody in power that actually.
Just speaking to Congress.
Under oath.
Mark, what's your take on Russophobia?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, let me correct something I'm seeing a lot of in the posts. Russia is a white Christian-loving nation. Yes and no. There are a lot of white Christians in Russia. Russia is a majority Orthodox country, right? And there is a lot of, what you would call great Russian ancestry here. But let's be clear. The Russian Federation has over 200 indigenous ethnicities, more than 200. That's not counting all the ethnicities from the former Soviet Union and other countries since. Russia is the second largest recipient of immigrants in the world. It has been in the last few years. I think Germany briefly passed it by, but that will reverse itself after that influx that Merkel invited in. Second largest destination of immigrants in the world, legal and illegal, after the United States. There are 5 major state-supported traditional faiths of Russia. Russian Orthodoxy is the foremost among those, yes, but there is also Sufi Islam, there is Kalmyk Buddhism, there is Eurasian Judaism, and there is shamanism, paganism. They are all accepted traditional faiths of Russia, and you can find people of all of those faiths, all different kinds of skin colors and ancestries here. As to the Russophobia thing, the United States has always needed an enemy, to present itself as the good guy, the white hat. Peter talked a lot about this othering that is very prevalent there. After the 90s, the United States, the deep state, they really missed Russia because the terrorists, Osama bin Laden, that didn't quite cut it. It wasn't quite the bogeyman that they needed to present. They were happy to see Russia reemerge and all too happy to paint Putin, as the devil incarnate. People forget that when Putin first came to power as an unsure little former FSB bureaucrat, right, out of St. Petersburg, he was pro-Western in the beginning.
Liberal.
He wanted Russia to join NATO and all the other international institutions, right? He was, for all intents and purposes, a liberal. He was the first one to speak to George W. Bush after 9/11, offer his condolences and Russian help with fighting terrorism around the world.
And it was real material help of being able to fly over Russian airspace to get to Afghanistan. It was real, not just words.
And Russia had a lot of connections with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, which is, after the U.S. helped the Mujahideen seize power in there, the Northern Alliance was what was basically left of the Soviet-supported socialist government of Afghanistan. Then the U.S. came in and put those people back in power. It's crazily ironic. But Putin didn't make Russia. Russia made Putin. And he is the president that Russia and Russians needed and represents their values. He didn't want to be the confrontation with the West Putin he is today, but he was forced to it by the needs of Russia and the Russian people, but also, even more importantly, perhaps, by the actions of the West. These continual color revolutions in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Ukraine again, even in countries like Libya and Syria, it's convinced Russia that you just can't do business. And of course, the constant meddling of the U.S. in Russian politics, Russian domestic politics, supporting fringe liberal and nationalist figures in Russia that they would never support in their own countries. This is the U.S. Part of it is geopolitics, of course. Russia is a big energy producer on the other side of the world. There's a little bit of geopolitics and balancing. You can go back to the whole Mackinder theory if you really want to, but I think a more modern interpretation of geopolitics, critical geopolitics, maybe works even better. But there's also this element of needing an enemy, and Russia being the perfect foil for that. In a few years, Trump wanted to move past that Russia as the enemy and wanted to actually ally with Russia, as Henry Kissinger suggested, against China. But the moment for that fled in 2007. That was the last time possible. And, Russia's never going to fall for that now. Russia is in bed with China, and I think for the better. Be it as it may, unfortunately, Russia and China on one side, the U.S. and a crumbling EU on the other, that's the geopolitical blocks going into the next century. And let's just hope it doesn't end in World War III.
Alexander, on Mark's point, we have a £5 super chat from Afterglow. With all that is happening in Europe, are we seeing the beginning of the end of the EU?
I think we are, but I think it's going to be an extremely slow process. And the reason why we're seeing the beginning of the end is because the EU leadership seems completely incapable of understanding the flaws in its own project. It is pressing on, even as it is provoking rebellions on all sides. In Britain, in France, with the Gilets jaunes, who we will no doubt be talking about more, in Southern Europe, in Italy, in Eastern Europe, in Hungary and Poland. But they continue to be determined to press on with this extraordinary mix of centralization at the administrative and political level and neoliberal economics that they're imposing on everybody else. And even though they see how unpopular it is, they persist with it. But the problem is that at this moment in time, there is no unity amongst the various groups that are opposed to this process. And I think for that reason, though consent for this project is draining away and opposition is growing and the structural problems within the EU economy are increasing, I think that we will see it will be a very long process before it finally breaks down. I think we're looking at 10 to 20 years.
Peter, on that, before you answer Alexander's point, also, can you tie it into another super chat we got from S. Fensel, who wants to know what are the chances of the yellow vest protests starting in Germany, but tie it into going elsewhere in Europe in general, Peter, as you answer Alexander's point as well.
They've set a precedent here. I mean, social movements are a pretty dodgy thing because they have to have the right ingredients to have staying power, to keep public interest, but not to become corrupt themselves. And I don't know where that situation is right now. I understand that this weekend the number of people that showed up were fewer. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a spent force. We have to remember these are working people. They have to work for a living. A lot of them are wage earners. So I think they've set a precedent. I think the future of the EU. I think what will happen is that you'll have a two-layered EU if this project is going to be sustainable. because actually countries like Germany find that they benefit from it. And it's all because of the euro. And see, countries like Greece should get out of the euro, where they would be given back their financial and economic toolbox to go back to what's the currency before
the drachma.
The drachma, yeah.
You know, let them, you know, make it artificially cheap so they can make their goods attractive. See, this is what's happened here, is that you don't have the toolkit. And see, countries like that should get out of the euro and maintain, I'm just saying from a policy point of view, have some kind of association agreement that might allow a lot more breathing room and stay away from the political project, for God's sake. Okay, nobody voted for that. Only the bureaucrats want it. I'm answering the question from the perspective of someone that might want to save it. Okay, I find the project to be very poorly designed and very well implemented. Okay, just like communism in the communist world. You know, people say it was a great idea. It was a bad idea, and it was implemented very well. Okay, and this is what liberalism is as well. Okay, it's a very bad idea implemented very well. So the only way the EU can survive is it has to have a much looser association. Countries should be able to opt out of the euro, to give themselves tools to be able to promote economic policies for growth at home. That's why Greece is going to be, for generations, it's done. It's toast. Because it has no tools. Alex?
Yes, can I just say, I just want to take issue with one point that you made, Peter. I agree with it, 90% of what you said. But knowing Germany very well, I don't agree that Germany is actually doing terribly well out of the system. If you know Germany, I mean, what is happening there is that infrastructure is rotting because there's no investment in it. There's growing inequality, growing social divisions, wage discrepancies are increasing. What has happened as a result of the system that we are seeing now is that certain groups within Germany have benefited from it. The export industries.
Okay, that's what I'm getting. The Germans, like, for example, Greece didn't keep the best of books. People are pretty slack about honesty when it comes to taxation. You know, and then the Greek government would never keep its budget under control. And then the culprit comes in. Let's give them a lot of money, okay? And then it's injected in there. Everybody feels like they're making, wow, Greece in the 1970s was a backwater, okay? And then all of a sudden, boom, you have this a flourishing middle class. It was all an illusion, and it's a German industrialists. They say, yeah, sell them more cars, more combines, etc., etc. That's what I should have been more precise. Like
yes. What is happening in Europe, and what explains both the survival of the system and why it is in the long run unsustainable, is that in every European country, you find groups of people who benefit from it. There are a lot of people in Europe, individuals, who are benefiting from the survival of the system. You find that in Britain also. You find people in London, for example, who are doing very well out of it and who do not want to see it changed. What is happening is that the number of losers is growing all the time, and the pressure upon them is increasing. The number of winners, by contrast, is slowly shrinking. And sooner or later, that is going to bring the whole thing tumbling down. But it is going to be a slow process, as this process of, as I said, division and lack of sustainability gets deeper.
All right, Imre, thank you for your super chat. He notes that we are plus 1,000 viewers. We're actually at about 1,167. Thank you for that super chat. Thank you, Miss K, for your super chat as well. And Glenn sent out a super chat just with the words Magnitsky Act. question marks. We've discussed the Magnitsky Act many times on previous chats. I don't know, Alexander, if you wanted to say something very quickly on that.
What I want to say about it is, first of all, I mean, this is irrespective of what happened to Magnitsky, about which we can say more. The Magnitsky Act itself is a monstrosity, because what it is the US Congress legislating about a Russian court case. It is saying these people in Russia are guilty of a crime that is supposed to have happened in Russia, and we are going to punish them. We are acting as a court. It is a classic example of American exceptionalism taken to an extreme. Legally, it is a monstrosity. It is against international law. It is now being extended to more and more countries. It is a disastrous precedent, and it should certainly not be repeated. I'm sure there are other things we could say about Magnitsky himself and about Bill Browder and all the rest, but I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, we've discussed it at quite a bit of length, and maybe we'll do a more in-depth video of that sometime in the future as well. Mark, a super chat from Milos, and we've gotten a lot of questions on this in previous super chats, but let's explore this a little more, because we have a lot of viewers who are very interested in what's happening in Kosovo. And the super chat is: Kosovo is forming an army. What's the next step? Can Serbs get their territory back? How will NATO, US react? By bombing Serbia again? Question mark. Would Russia intervene? Mark, what's your take on what's happening in Kosovo, and with Milos's question?
Okay, first of all, full disclosure, I'm sure most of you know already, I mentioned I'm U.S. military and U.S. Navy, and that included acts against Serbia, which I am not proud of, and I still apologize to every Serb I meet. So I've got a little bit of bias against unilateral U.S. and NATO military action against Serbia there. Kosovo is a region of Serbia that was dismembered by NATO in the first territorial border change by force, by military force since World War II. It was completely against international law, and Kosovo unfortunately probably will not be Serbia. It has been turned into a NATO protectorate, where a group formerly listed by the United States as a terrorist organization, the Kosovo Liberation Army, whom even the European Council has given credit to reports that the now president of Kosovo was involved in what they call human organ smuggling. It's not actually human organ smuggling. It's human butchering, pulling out their organs and then selling them. I mean, that's what it is. You've got a little mafia, Albanian mafia state there that is protected by NATO, hosting a giant U.S. military base. And Kosovo was the biggest recruiting country for ISIS in all of Europe. And that tells you what you need to know there. So, yes, the Kosovo parliament, encouraged and supported by the United States, has declared that they will form their own army. Kosovo is recognized by about half the countries in the world, the western half rejected by Russia, China, and the other half in the world. In fact, if you take a look at the countries that recognize Kosovo and the countries that recognize Palestine, they're nearly opposite of each other. And that tells you a lot about geopolitics if you look at that map right there. So this is turning what was the Kosovo security force into an actual military. It will initially be some 5,000 strong. It's another little micro country for the U.S. military industrial complex to sell arms from. Some of the NATO members, and it has to be remembered that 5 members of the EU do not recognize Kosovo. Even 5 EU countries do not recognize Kosovo's unilateral declaration of independence, because they've got breakaway separatist people of their own, and they don't want to see that applied to them. So what will happen next with this military? It will most likely be used what is already happening in Kosovo. there was a huge ethnic cleansing of Serbs from Kosovo, of ethnic Serbs from Kosovo. There were several 100,000 that were forced out at the end when NATO started bombing the country and then, militarily carved it out. But there are still about 150,000 Serbs in northern Kosovo that are constantly under repression and attack, and that Kosovo does not have a lot of authority over that region now. They will use this military to exert control over the border between Serbia and the Serbian majority area of northern Kosovo. Repressions, attacks on Orthodox churches will probably increase, and you will see more Serbians flee into ethnic Serbs in Kosovo flee back to Serbia. Is Serbia going to get their Kosovo back? No, unfortunately, probably not. Serbia is completely surrounded by Europe and NATO. Even if Russia wanted to help them, this isn't World War I. It's no longer possible. And unfortunately, if you take a look at the polls in Serbia, the percentage of the young population in particular that is liberal, pro-Western leaning, and wants to have free visa travel throughout Europe is growing. And it's already somewhat dominant at the polls. And I'm afraid to say that, however, deeply strong, the 48% of the population, that wants to retake Kosovo and wants to, maintain relations with Russia and their traditional culture. The demographic trends are all in the wrong direction. And the leverage and pressure from the EU and NATO is simply too much. And eventually they will manage to get in a Serbian president who will recognize Kosovo, even if it means the end of his political career. And then Serbia and Kosovo will both be brought into the EU and NATO, and that will probably happen in the next 10 years.
We have to point out that the European members of NATO were against this move to develop a Kosovo army. It's the United States that was pushing it, because the Europeans know they're at fault for the illegal breakup of Yugoslavia, but they know what kind of tinderbox is in the Balkans right now. And this move to create this national army, 5,000 now, who knows what it will be. And I agree, this is not going to be to go fight anyone outside of the borders of Kosovo. It's going to be used as leverage against people within Kosovo, and that is a Serb minority.
Alexander, does all of this that's happening in the Balkans, does this worry you?
Yes, it does worry me. And can I just come to a point that Mark says? I mean, what is important to say is all of this process that Mark was talking about of changing Serbia, of Kosovo and Serbia becoming integrated into NATO, EU institutions, is totally dependent on the continued exertion of NATO and Western power in the Balkans. If that starts to slacken, if there is a major geopolitical restructuring, if there is an international crisis, if there is a sense in the Balkans that the US and NATO and the EU cannot any longer control the situation in the way that they are doing, the Balkans being the Balkans, and it is my region, things could change there very, very fast. And I repeat what I have said before. In spite of that change in the mood in Serbia, which is true, but if the attractions of the EU, of all of these things change, then we have a Serbia which is angry, has been humiliated, and which is aggrieved, surrounded by weak NATO microstates, which Mark is correct to refer to as NATO protectorates, with Serbia having grievances against all of them. If the NATO, as I said, the NATO force is withdrawn in any way, then it is very easy to see how there could be a war in the Balkans again. And the other problem is, of course, that in the existence of NATO and the existence of that pressure on Serbia encourages people in these other micro countries, in Macedonia, we've seen it already, Macedonia, in Kosovo, in Bosnia. There is always a possibility that some of these people could overplay their hand and start a new spiral of violence also. The Balkans is not a stable region. It is extremely unstable. And the possibility of a flare-up there is very real. That is certainly my view. And it's also the view of a lot of people in Greece.
Our viewers, of course, they remember everything and they call it Peter Clinton's war, Bill Clinton's war.
Yeah.
And on that, Peter, do you think that Russia has anything that they could do to stop conflict in the Balkans? Remember, we had Medvedev. We had a weak Russia, a weak Russia back then when Bill Clinton started to bomb Serbia for 72, 74 days straight. A new Russia, can it do anything?
Well, I mean, if Serbia did feel that it was being, in a meaningful sense, being threatened by NATO countries, then I wouldn't be surprised if it would come to its aid as far as giving it military hardware for defensive purposes. This is not 1914. It's already been said here that Russia is not going to put itself be involved in an existential threat over Serbia. Unfortunately, everyone, that's the truth. Okay, it doesn't have the capacity to do that. It's not necessarily in its geopolitical interest either. Though, having said that, Russia has given Serbia an enormous amount of support diplomatically, which is important here. As far as how Serbia deals with the Kosovo issue, Russia has made it very clear in public fora that it will back its Serbian ally and friend on almost anything that it plans to do. So Russia has their back. But let's not be romantic. This is geopolitics. There's limits to what Russia could do, and Russia has to obviously think of its own geopolitical interest first. So we'll see where this goes.
Mark, on switching gears to Syria, I read an article on Zero Hedge, which now says the U.S. is setting up a permanent base, a permanent protectorate about the size of Croatia in Syria. What is happening in Syria, and why is the U.S. deciding to stay permanently there?
Yeah, this isn't new. I mean, this has already been declared for about 2 months now, and it's been de facto for almost 2 years now. The U.S. has basically de facto partitioned Syria and has seized the eastern half, east of the Euphrates. This is the most poorly populated area of Syria. It is mostly desert. A few very small cities, but it is also the part with the most oil. Figure that the Americans end up with that, right?
Well, they deny Damascus.
Yeah, it's not that they want the oil; it's denying the oil to Damascus so that they can stabilize the country and rebuild the country. That's what it's about. The Americans don't have any real pipelines way of getting it out of there, of course. What they are supporting in what they've manufactured in eastern Syria, they call the Syrian Democratic Forces. This is a force that is 90-some% composed of Kurds, in particular the YPG, which are a leftist, kind of cultish, Marxist, anarchist, political force that it doesn't represent all Kurds, but represents the majority in Syria and in Turkey, probably. The Iraqi Kurds and Iranian Kurds are kind of a different story politically. The Kurds have never fought the Syrian government seriously in the war. The Kurds have actually been fighting. The Pentagon-backed Kurds were fighting the CIA-backed Islamists, as well as the Islamic State. That's Obama's wonderful strategy years in there. But Trump basically stopped support for the CIA Islamists, doubled down on the Kurds, and while not fighting with the Syrian government, they've basically decamped in East Syria. They have constructed at least 12 U.S. military bases there, including 4 airfields. There are at least 4,000 boots on the ground, actual military troops, and it probably near half that number in mercenaries and special forces as well. It's all under the command of JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, which means that everything about it is secret, right? It's not open to any kind of transparency about exactly how many troops, which units, budgets. These things are not open, and that part of Syria under U.S./Kurdish proxy domination is part of this 3-way Mexican standoff in Syria between the Syrian government, Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah on one side, Turkey and the jihadis, including Al-Qaeda and Ahrar al-Sham and these other 31 flavors of jihad in the north, and the Americans and the Kurds in the east. And right now, Erdogan, having seized part of the north of Syria and cleansed it of Kurds, is now looking angrily at its ostensible NATO ally, the United States, and is not very happy with the U.S. supporting the Kurds there, which it and no one else in the world regards as terrorists. To be clear, for Erdogan, Al-Qaeda, not terrorists, Kurds terrorists. That's the way the Turks see things. So because they've got their own restive population of Kurds in the east. So Erdogan has been making a lot of noise about moving into northern Syria, east of the Euphrates, against the Kurds in the U.S. occupied zone. The U.S. has responded by erecting more observation posts along the border to try to prevent Turkey from launching a military operation. And they're still dancing around each other. There's a few artillery shells and some minor skirmishes going back and forth. But in my opinion, Erdogan doesn't really have the balls to risk outright direct military conflict with the United States. But he's trying to threaten them into at least walking out of Manbij, which is the one city controlled by the Kurds, by the American SDF, that is west of the Euphrates. And the U.S. and Turkey have long had a number of agreements about what will happen in Manbij, and basically the Americans have broken every one of them, and they haven't withdrawn the Kurds yet. So that's where we are. And the Syrian government and Russia at this point are basically hoping that Turkey and the United States fight each other, and then they'll clear whatever invader is left over from the Syrian country. That's the game plan, but it's not clear at all that that's exactly what's going to happen. Right now, it's still a 3-way Mexican standoff, but the U.S. has de facto partitioned East Syria. There's no end in sight to this partition. There is no clear strategy other than they don't want Iranian influence in Syria, i.e. Syria is not allowed to choose who its allies are, and the Iranians aren't going anywhere, certainly not with the U.S. there. And the U.S. created this situation by overthrowing the government in Iraq and creating a Shia majority country that aligned itself with Iran there. Now they're trying to double down and reduce Iran's influence in the region in Syria, and once again, they've only created another firm Syrian ally.
History, this century has proven the more you push against Iranian influence, the more you create it. No, in a nutshell, Mark did a wonderful, detailed job. In a nutshell, it's another illegal occupation, but this time without a mission. So they're still searching for a mission for this illegal occupation of a country.
Well, but they do have an objective, which is, to be clear, it is to prevent the Syrian government consolidating its position in Syria. This is what it's all about. They want to continue. They want to perpetuate a conflict in Syria because they hope that by doing so, that will make it possible to destabilize the Syrian government in future and will weaken this alliance between Syria and Iran, which the United States is very concerned about. So they have an objective. They don't have a clear strategy about how to achieve it.
And I've got a quote from James Jeffrey, the U.S. envoy to Syria here this week. And he said, Trump's policy in Syria is not regime change, but an irreversible political process which will change the nature and behavior of the Syrian regime. You got that? So very not regime change.
That is and that's also against international law. Okay.
And irreversible behavior change.
Well, the presence of US troops in Syria without the agreement of the Syrian government and without the authorization of the UN Security Council is contrary to international law. Let's just be absolutely clear about that.
Peter, in the Zero Hedge article, they did mention that the locals, that the people that are being occupied by the U.S. military are extremely unhappy. What does this speak to you about, that the actions do have consequences? You mentioned that many times.
The U.S. is, I think, Alexander Mercouris put it very well. But that you're talking about the politics of it, and I'm talking about the military part of it. They have no mission except for to remain there, to make sure Syria cannot recover, and that will obviously be at the expense of people on the ground that have had enough of this war. Mark was correct in saying this is sparsely populated. You have a foreign military there, traipsing around doing whatever they want to do. The locals have to, I mean, they're under occupation. And there's no, from what I can tell, Mark was correct that all of this is secret, but are they building schools for these people? Are they building houses?
No, there's no reconstruction going on at all. They're very angry about that. And also that area is Sunni Arab majority. They are not happy about being ruled by either Americans or the Kurds. They don't like the Kurds.
All right.
They don't like outsiders. They go home, everyone. Jeez.
Speaking of conflicts aimed at stopping Iran or preventing Iranian influence, Alexander, do you have a quick update as to what's happening in Yemen?
Well, there's been talk about ceasefires, which I don't take seriously. There's been talk about famine relief operations in Yemen, which I'm afraid I don't take seriously either. I think the war in Yemen is grinding on, despite certain reports that you may see going on to the contrary. I think there is still huge pressure on this one solitary port that is left. I think it's Hodeida, which is holding out. I think that you will see a major effort at some point in the next few months to try and capture it, and that will create a bigger humanitarian crisis. I'm afraid I think we have to be very clear about Yemen. What you read in the media about the developments there and what the actual reality on the ground is completely different. I think that talk about, as I said, ceasefires and humanitarian relief operations should not be taken with anything other than a gigantic mountain of salt.
As long as MBS is
you took the very words, Peter, out of my mouth. Provided we have people like MBS and the Saudi regime driving this war, supported by the United States as they are, we're not going to see peace in Yemen. Unless, of course, things go very badly wrong and we see a crisis in Saudi Arabia. But as I said, peace in Yemen is not happening anytime soon.
All right, Peter, we have a £5 super chat from Afterglow. Will the UN Immigration Pact be the tipping point that sets Europe on fire? For example, demonstrations in Brussels today. Yeah, immigration in Europe.
It's very interesting is that in Belgium, the government fell. And there was an online, I think it was through Facebook effort to out and out call the Prime Minister of Belgium a traitor. Yes, this is a third rail for a lot of people here. We've discussed this immigration accord before. It's non-mandatory. It is much more virtue signaling, though governments obviously could act upon it. Okay, obviously so. But this is the one of the most burning questions in Europe is immigration. And as we've said repeatedly in these podcasts, the political elites, and it's left or right, I mean, they will not address this issue the way the average worker needs to have policy enacted. So I think that the more these governments tout this kind of accord, the more they're going to be skirting problems. So yeah, we're going to keep an eye on it, but read the text. It's not, nothing is really enforced. It just allows governments to say, well, you know, we're implementing what the UN says here to have more immigration. It's more political cover than it is anything that is mandatory and that can be enforced.
Peter, you are absolutely right in everything you said. But can we just point out what an extraordinarily misconceived thing it is to do this now, at precisely the time when immigration in Europe is an extremely, incendiary topic. It is also an incendiary topic in the United States. So what do? You go ahead and you come up with a document like this. It may have absolutely no mandatory force at all, but it is virtue signaling in the most politically inept and provocative way.
Well, why do you think they're doing it, Alexander?
Well, these people are ideologically possessed, okay? It's part of their menu, all right?
There must be a reason, though. There must be a reason.
Well,
they're doing it now.
I think it's partly, partly is what Peter said. I mean, there is an ideological dimension to this. I think partly, in truth, it's also intended to sort of marginalize or to stigmatize people within Europe and the United States who are against immigration or who want to see limits on immigration. You say to them, this is against UN policy. That proves that you're an extreme, bigoted, right-wing, fascist, whatever it is person, which will, of course, make for even more provocations.
Yeah. You'll just yellow vest more people, okay? That's what you're going to do. No, the thing is that particularly the European Union, this project is one of the most important objectives is to destroy nations within the European Union. They want to destroy nations, and immigration is a perfect tool to do that. Remember, nationalism is the opposite of patriotism. This Macron's got to go. This guy's a real nutcase. No, it's not, and we've had podcasts about this. People do believe in their nation and in their culture, and it doesn't have to be in a hateful way, okay? Nationalism and patriotism has nothing to do with ethno-nationalism and fascism, okay? And I was disgusted by Western media that tried to brush the yellow vests as some kind of extremist, violent group, radical right and left. Nothing more could be further from the truth. All right, and this is what liberals fear the most. They fear the people. They fear the people that can think for themselves and stand up and say, enough is enough of your nonsense. Your policies don't adversely affect you. They adversely affect us in very meaningful ways. I read an interview with a French nurse, which, you know, I think all of us would think being a nurse is a wonderful human calling in life. They can't live for an entire month on their wages. They're desperate. People are getting desperate. You enforce an ideology that doesn't adversely affect the people that are pushing it. So people are saying enough.
There you go. Mark, is the rumor true that Erdogan would give help to West Ukraine?
Erdogan would like maybe to give help to West Ukraine as another way to needle Russia, but he's far too reliant on Russia at this point. There were a few flirtations with the Westpac Putsch government in Ukraine about the time he shot down the Russian plane and with the Russian sanctions on Turkey, on tourism and produce and so on, that did quite a bit of damage to the Turkish economy. Turkey gets lots of Russian tourists in its beaches. But he needs Russia too much economically. He needed the gas pipeline. Turkey is almost entirely dependent on Russia, particularly for gas, but, energy in general. And the economic costs of going against Russia are so high, and he couldn't go. He's already had problems with an obviously concerted effort by the United States to sink the lira. And he had a lot of that, and it has to be said, he's mismanaged his own economy pretty well there as well. But he had too many economic problems. So Turkey and Russia are in a weird type of geopolitical dance right now. They have good relations with each other, except in Syria, where they are at war with each other. And, that's basically the reality of it. So I like to imagine it as Erdogan and Putin are waltzing across a ballroom with daggers pointed against each other's backs while patting each other on the other side. It's a complicated, it's a cynical game. It has all been an attempt by Russia to deal with one of Syria's enemies at a time. And the whole attempt, this jihadi proxy armies to overthrow the Syrian government were only ever possible in the north of Syria because of Turkey, because of that border there where the jihadis could come in, where they could be resupplied from, where they could be paid at these euphemistically called mom centers in Turkey that still exist and everything. But his idea was to cut out all of the other players. And Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE are effectively out of it at this point. Their support for the jihadis in Syria is down to, shall we say, negligible, certainly manageable amounts. The U.S. has stopped arming at least the Islamists if they've doubled down on the Kurds. And Turkey is left basically supporting all of the jihadi opposition. It's got about half of them that have officially donned Turkish proxy uniforms, as it were. Part of it is called the New Syrian National Army, they call it. That's in the Jarablus corridor. In Idlib, it's called the National Liberation Federation, and it's Ahad al-Sham and the formerly U.S.-backed child head choppers of Helsinki and so on. So there's still this tight geopolitical dance. And right now, Erdogan doesn't have the political or the resources to be able to aid Ukraine. If Russia and Turkey end up in an actual military confrontation in Syria, which both sides are trying very hard to avoid, but may be inevitable, then you might see Erdogan try to support West Ukraine in some ways, but mostly it would be political. Erdogan does feel he has a certain amount of historical right to Crimea because of the Ottoman Empire and the Crimean Khanate, that was formed there after the Mongol Empire, and then it was absorbed into as a proxy state with the Ottoman Empire. He feels that he has a certain amount of rights there because of the Crimean Tatar minority, which really don't care about Turkey at all. Myself having a lot of familiarity with Crimea, with my wife being from there and all. So he can get up to some small mischief in Ukraine if things worsen again and you move into direct confrontation between Turkey and Russia. If not, I expect he will lay off that completely.
All right, Alexander, I'm going to throw a question at you here. It's a super chat from Neil, and I'll try to kind of get to the point of this question. How do you explain Zionist support, like Rebel Media? I don't know if you're familiar with Rebel Media, for many identitarian movements around Europe, while other Zionists support no border activists? I think the question is Rebel Media is, I think the question is really there's some alternative YouTube channels or alternative media channels which are supporting, some call them far right, some call them nationalists. some call them conservative, while there's other channels which are, of course, the no borders. And how do you reconcile this? And of course, you have the question of the Zionist, the nebulous Zionist word that's floated around. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think we've got to be very careful before assuming that, you know, the Zionists control or support or support all of these things. There are right-wing Zionists, there are left-wing Zionists. Zionists is about supporting the state of Israel and the policies that the state of Israel is following, which, to be clear, I oppose. I oppose the kind of policies that the state of Israel is currently pursuing. But if one looks at the situation, not just on alternative media, but generally, it is a complete fallacy to think that, you know, there are right-wing sites that support, that, you know, that there are right-wing sites and left-wing sites, and the Zionists should support one and not the other. I think this is a total misconception, and I'm sure it doesn't apply at all. There are right-wing people, and there are left-wing people, and alternative media simply reflects this fact.
All right, Peter. During your last episode of Crosstalk, you talked with a Scottish fellow in the UK who said free trade ruined Russia. Well, do you remember that? And what's your thoughts on free trade in Russia?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a free trade specifically. What it was that after the Soviet Union collapsed itself, it enacted a number of policies that essentially ruined the economy. When you had shock therapy and all of these things like this, Russia was very much a victim of that. And then as a result of that, and we have the advent of Boris Yeltsin, he sold off the family jewels to oligarchs, and those oligarchs did everything in their power to get in bed with Western capital. So essentially what happened was you had really the deindustrialization of Russia. Russia didn't have really much to sell to anyone in the world. It wasn't given any kind of special trade deals with the West. I mean, Russia was left to just die, all right? And it had a leadership that looked only out of self-interest and not for the interests of society. And that's why, if we can compare Russia and Ukraine, the best thing that happened to Russia was the destruction of the political power of the oligarchs. That has never happened in Ukraine. And so, again, I'll repeat or paraphrase Mark. I mean, it's not Putin's Russia, it's Russia's Putin. And the economic system they have now, it has its problems. People do complain. Russians, it's part of their genetic code, is to complain. But it wasn't free trade per se. There wasn't a lot of trade really right then and there. But what happened was that with this poorly conceived economic shock therapy that Russia underwent, what happened was that they told them to sell off the most valuable things. Well, common sense would say, why don't we keep the best for ourselves, and then we can sell off these other things here, and then, you know, have them rejuvenated, rehabilitated. They can start providing for the tax base, while these commanding heights giants in mineral extraction, oil and gas, that would be enough to keep the state coffers loaded, where they could spend on social policy. The advice, and I actually praised Jeffrey Sachs today on Crosstalk. Mark was there about an article he wrote about the different elements going on with the quote-unquote trade war with China. But he got it wrong in Russia in the 1990s.
And he's apologized for it since.
Yeah. I mean, can I say, I mean, free trade is a misconception. What created the economic collapse in Russia in the 1990s were three things. Firstly, a political collapse of state institutions, because, I mean, they were all very bound up with the Soviet Union, and their legitimacy was connected to them. The dissolution of the Soviet Union created a major crisis of political legitimacy, which made government extremely difficult. Secondly, it was an extraordinary decision that was taken by Boris Yeltsin's government in December 1991 to liberalize all prices at a stroke at a time of major imbalances in the economy, which simply triggered massive hyperinflation. But third, and most serious of all, was the incredibly, grotesquely corrupt privatization that was carried out in 1992, 1993 by Boris Yeltsin's administration. I mean, I remember at the time when I heard about how it was going to be done, I was saying this is going to be an absolute nightmare. It is going to be a total cataclysm, and so it turned out to be. It created the totally corrupted economic system with this tiny group of deeply corrupt oligarchs at the top of it, who by the end of the 1990s were essentially running the government and the state in their own interests, and were ransacking the country. Now, there were problems with the trade system. One of them was obviously, as I said, these people were not interested in developing Russia's industries; they were plundering them. So, in a situation where goods could move into the country at a time when its domestic industries were being plundered, that did create major problems. The other thing that happened was that, of course, Yeltsin and his government, in order, I think, to retain a certain measure of support, tried to control oil and gas prices on the domestic market at the same time as they were liberalizing the trade system. So that meant that the same class of corrupt oligarchs that we're talking about were buying energy goods, oil and gas, in Russia at low prices, and selling them, exporting them out into the West at high prices. And that is how people like Khodorkovsky and Berezovsky and all these ghastly people that we all remember. Timoshenko, indeed, because that's also been the practice in Ukraine. That is how they made their money. But free trade has played a minimal role in it, though I should say, moving away from free trade in a situation where the industries are reviving and agriculture is reviving and investment flows are returning is a good thing. And we have the sanctions and the pressure on the ruble to thank for it.
All right, everyone on the chat, we hear you, and we are going to get to Justin Trudeau and the Huawei story right now. First of all, we have over 1,300 viewers online right now watching us. Thank you to everyone who is tuning in.
Your people are crazy.
Thank you for tuning in to this live chat. We really appreciate it. Share this channel with everybody you know. Hit that like button, subscribe. Duran Shop 20% off all throughout December. Peter, Justin Trudeau, what do you think of the pickle that Justin Trudeau has placed himself in? He's got China on one side, he's got the US on the other, and he's got the CFO for Huawei under house arrest. I guess, Alexander, I don't know if you would describe it as that, but she's stuck in Canada. What's going on?
No, it couldn't happen to a nicer clown of a politician. Yeah, it's really interesting because we've seen this little media saga with Trudeau and Trump, you know, the polar opposites, and Trudeau likes it, actually. He likes being the snowflake guy and representing the globalist version of liberalism. But he's put himself into a real pickle here. What is that? China and the United States are going to fight each other until the last Canadian. Because that's what Trudeau has basically put himself into. You know, I don't know what percentage Canada makes up of the world economy. It's not really large. The Chinese can give them a real wallop. And with this kidnapping and basically extortion of the CFO, the Chinese are not going to take that kindly. And they have already shown their displeasure by 2 Canadians being arrested. This is not going to end very well for Trudeau. He's punching above his weight as usual. He could have very easily said, you guys, you both, this is an issue for the Chinese and for the Americans to resolve. There's no reason why Canada should inject itself. because China could be a very big loser in all of this. So,
Canada.
Trudeau should go back to China, go back to India and wear the silly clothes, okay? He does that better. He doesn't understand geopolitics.
Mark, China, was it a good idea for Trudeau to do this? Is China pissed off?
Or
is this just theater? I don't know.
This little liberal playboy is so far over his head. All right. So, first of all, there's absolutely no grounds for the U.S. to launch an extradition request against this Huawei FCO, Meng Wanzhou. She is obviously a big figure. She is the daughter of the founder, and she's considered the heir apparent of the country. Articles in the New York Times and elsewhere, in between the lines and so on, they've exposed that the U.S. was deliberately targeting Huawei for something. They wanted something, and they were particularly targeting her. They were looking about going after her about some illegal, what they consider illegal tech trades and so on, but they settled on this as the best technical way to get her. This was planned months in advance. Canada was fully in on it. Any protestations that they were just obeying an extradition request from the United States is absolute nonsense. This is on the basis of old unilateral illegal U.S. sanctions against Iran. She's being charged with providing misleading information in a presentation to HSBC, the U.S.-UK bank, that transferred money from a Huawei subsidiary, Skycom, to Iran, none of which is illegal in Canada, right? And it's not even clear it's illegal in the United States. And all of the sanctions were gotten rid of anyway in the JCPOA, which was officiated with a UN Security Council resolution. This is pure politics, and geopolitics even more. Trump made that clear when he tweeted out openly that, we might be able to drop the charges if China agrees to a trade deal. It's open kidnapping and ransom. Trudeau knew about it and went along with it. And 2 Canadian citizens are now paying the price. And good for China fighting back for their citizens and their rights. I wish Russia had the balls to do that with the case with Maria Butina and just take an American hostage and say, you give ours back, we'll give yours back then. And Trudeau, this is just the beginning for Canada, because China, as well as, this seizing of the 2 Canadian nationals for getting up to all kinds of what seems to be all kinds of little color revolution stuff in China. China is going to put the economic squeeze on Canada. And this is after Trump bounced them around with tariffs and forcing this new NAFTA, U.S., Mexico, Canada trade deal on him. Shame on him. I mean, all he had to do was make a call at the least and say, hey, you probably don't want to come to my country because the Americans are looking for you, and I don't want a major international incident putting Canada in between a U.S. Chinese trade war.
Yeah.
What does China get out of this? I'm sorry, what does Canada get out of this? What? Don't you think that Trump is going to be insulting Trudeau if he hasn't already? It's just, Trudeau doesn't even get on Trump's radar, okay? So what is he going to do? Call up Justin and say, good job, we'll make you a special deal. Trump's not going to do that. Trudeau gets no upside from doing this. Zero.
Alexander, why?
There's just one more, because I agree with what's been said, but I just wanted to clarify one point, because, and I speak now from experience, extradition at this level, is never simply a legal process. It is always, in part, and often in main part, a political process. A usual principle in extradition proceedings is that countries do not extradite third country citizens who have not committed anything that within the country that is being asked to extradite them would be defined as a crime. Mrs. Meng has committed nothing that Canada defines as a crime, so it should not extradite her. There is no legal case here. It is purely a political matter. It is clear politics. Canada siding with the US against China. It is partly Justin Trudeau engaging in that virtue signaling towards China, which he loves to do. And Canada is paying a fearful price for it. And it is one which the Chinese, and what I've heard about China is that the Chinese business elite are in shock about this and very, very angry. Canada will pay a very heavy price for it, and a price for it going forward.
Ask Alexander Mercouris a question. I mean, at what point is it criminal and it's not civil? I mean, wouldn't this be a civil thing that, if it had any merits on it, would be?
Well, extradition is one of these strange things that isn't fully civil, that it isn't fully.
No, I'm saying the remedy should have never been taking a hostage.
Absolutely not. Well, I mean.
Alexander, can you also address for everybody, as well as myself, what exactly she's being held for? What's this what is this Iranian connection that they keep bringing up?
Well, I mean, the point is, I think Mark explained it actually quite well. It was all about these deals that a subsidiary of Huawei did with Iran, many years ago, violating US unilateral sanctions. Not a crime in Canada.
Alexander, can I ask you a quick question?
Should not be extraditing her. Go on.
How many, two questions, right? One real quick one to lead into each other. How many U.S. and other Western corporations have been caught breaking these unilateral U.S. sanctions on Iran?
Well, lots of them. I have
JP Morgan.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. How many of their corporate officers have been arrested for breaking sanctions?
None.
What is the history of the U.S. arresting corporate officers?
None in this way. None. I mean, it doesn't happen. I mean, this is not. Let's be clear about this. This is not a legal process. It is a kidnapping carried out on dubious pretexts, using legalism to provide some kind of cover. But it is a kidnapping, pure and simple. It is against international law, and Canada is implicated in it. It is astonishing that the Canadians have allowed themselves to be drawn into this thing in the way that they have. And Mark, you are absolutely right to draw attention to the fact that this is not how Western business people are treated. That is not it's got nothing to do with Iran. It's got nothing to do with what Huawei did with Iran. It is entirely because Huawei is a powerful Chinese company that is challenging American technology companies like Apple at a time when the United States feels that it is being challenged by China in its domination of the computer and AI industries.
All right, guys, we are approaching 2 hours, so we'll go on for about another 10 minutes or so, and we'll wrap it up. Peter, why did Trudeau, though, and I'm still not connecting all the dots, why did Trudeau agree to this? Did he get suckered into this? Did he make a stupid decision? Was he forced into this? Do they have something on him? What is your take? Why is Canada all of a sudden embroiled in this? A country which traditionally, historically, does not get involved in these types of issues.
I don't have a good answer for that question, but the thing that comes right to my mind, listening to the question, was his press conference announcing it. And it was almost like he was reading a script that was given to him. It lacked his usual egotistical virtue signaling. It was like he was a press agent explaining the legal position of the Canadian government. It was very much out of it wasn't a performance that he usually gives. So I would suspect, because I don't have any dots to connect right now, that he was told in no uncertain terms he must do this. Because as Mark has pointed out, it's not like it was a snap decision. The Canadians were involved in this for a certain period of time, weeks, months before. I don't understand their calculus, okay?
I mean, they laid a trap. They laid a trap.
Yeah. Where's Bolton in all of this?
Yeah,
Mark?
Bolton knew about it. Trudeau knew about it. Supposedly, Trump didn't know about it. That. I don't know if I believe that, but it's kind of strange.
Alexander?
Well, I mean, I think we can overanalyze Trudeau's reasons.
That's why I'm being very careful.
What about Bolton? What about Bolton? What about the fact they were at the G20? Bolton was sitting next to Trump, and he knew all the time.
He knew all the time. As I said, if Trump really, truly didn't know, then actually, I rather believe he didn't, because I find it difficult. I find it difficult to believe that he would have sat across Xi Jinping and negotiated it that way, and knowing something like this behind him. But I don't know. I don't know what was going on between the two of them. But whatever it was, what it shows yet again, the fact that Bolton knew, is that Bolton is now, in effect, the foreign policy director of the United States. The person who's running foreign policy in the United States is John Bolton. John Bolton sees China as an adversary of the United States. His method is to go against any country that he sees as an adversary of the United States with all the tools at his disposal. And that's what he's done with Huawei. He wants to damage Huawei. He wants to put Huawei on the defensive. He wants to push it out of the American market in whatever way he can. And he has used this piece of leverage that this person provided to do it.
So, Peter, Bolton or Pompeo, who do you think has more power when talking about foreign policy and geopolitics? And me and Mark did a show on this as well, where we discussed Mike Pompeo's influence.
And kudos to Mark and to you. I thought it was one of the best videos that Duran has ever put out. I thought Mark's analysis was really spot on. I don't know, and I'm very curious. I tend to think that because Bolton has a much longer infighting with the bureaucracy, he understands how it works, and I think he may have an advantage there. But if you look at the German Marshall Fund speech that Pompeo made, he's making a bid to be the spokesperson of the Trump administration on foreign policy. So I think there's a little bit of sword work going on there. How much they work together, how much they work at cross purposes, we don't know yet. But that's something I think all of us here will be following very closely.
Mark, wrap it up. Okay, Alexander, and then Mark, wrap it up, guys. Who do you think's the big dog when it comes to foreign policy in the U.S.? Pompeo, Bolton? What's going on?
I think Bolton is, but I don't think Pompeo can be counted out. I mean, Bolton is ultimately a bureaucrat. That is his skill. He knows how to manipulate the bureaucracy, and he has his own ideas. Pompeo is a politician in his own right, and that does give him certain advantages in the political system, which I suspect Bolton doesn't have.
It's interesting, Alexander Mercouris, is that, again, going back to the the German Marshall Plan speech, that he was positioning himself as the spokesperson for Donald Trump, okay? And Bolton is more the tactician. He's the guy that gets his hands dirty here. And I think that's the different currents back and forth. Pompeo is making a bid. What he had to say was completely nonsense. It was really weird, and you guys did a great job in analyzing it. We know that Bolton and Trump do not see eye to eye on everything. And then that gives us a reason for pause, that if Trump didn't know about this arrest, then it was intentional on the part of Bolton. He didn't say, "Oh, I forgot." No. So there's an interesting dynamic going on here.
Mark.
Yeah. So I haven't seen any indication that Bolton and Pompeo are anyway in conflict. If anything, I see them as synergistic, right? I mean, there may be egos is always reason enough, but
there's going to be an alpha male, Mark. There's could only be one.
Bolton is a hardcore neocon, right? And he's been in previous administrations in these top positions, and he has an agenda. A lot of it is shared by Pompeo, but Pompeo has other political ambitions. He comes out of Congress. And now the State Department under Pompeo is more militarist than the Pentagon. Think about that. But I get the feeling that right now the real person in the driver's seat is Bolton. Bolton seems to be the one driving Iran policy, North Korea policy, Syria policy. I haven't seen anywhere that is exclusively Pompeo's, except maybe for North Korea. And I think they're on the same page as that one anyway.
Indeed. And it's Bolton who goes to Moscow and talks to the Russians, for what it's worth.
Great. All right. Guys, 2 hours plus 2 hours, 10 minutes. This was a great show. Thank you, Eagle, for your super chat. And thank you, Thomas, for your super chat. 1,300 viewers. Thank you very much to everybody. Guys, we also passed the 50,000 subscriber mark. And that is all thanks to you, everybody who is watching us and has been watching our shows at the Duran. We appreciate everything that you guys do for us. Let's look at the week ahead. We're heading into Christmas and the New Year and the holiday season. Peter, what are you tracking this week?
Julian Assange. I think it's getting really close. It's getting really close. And I think that we could see still some murmurings around MBS. It seems like the media is priming up against. They want family. They want a change in the family. They don't want a regime change in Saudi Arabia. I guess I'm the last person to have hope. I'm still looking at Yemen, seeing what different forces. I know, Mark, I know, but I can't give up on it. I can't. Okay, but I'm watching that one very closely as well.
All right, Mark, what are you looking at this week ahead?
Of course, Syria is on my mind, and Erdogan's talking a lot of
BS
species there, right? But at the end of the day, I don't think he's got the balls to go to war with the U.S.
You have to say it.
Yeah. So I got an eye there, but I'm also watching what's happening in Ukraine with this manufacturing of an entirely new Orthodox Ukrainian splinter church there with the blessing of this patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew, and seemingly no one else in the Orthodox world. This is really important. The Ukrainian patriarch, at least up until yesterday, Filaret, he gave an award to a CIA deputy associate this week for helping the Ukrainian independence and the creation of this church, right? The CIA is helping you create your church. That tells you something. I mean, everything that's going on in Ukraine right there. He gave him the Order of St. Andrew, the highest order that he can give out. It's really shameful. And a lot of people aren't paying enough attention to this, but this is a second, if maybe you want to count it as a third great schism in Christianity. We had the schism between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, and then between Catholicism and the various Lutheran branches. Now we're seeing a split in Orthodoxy itself, and it is entirely geopolitical, and the U.S. has its hands deep inside of it. It's going to create bloody fault lines in Ukraine, and the possibility that the new regime will start violently seizing all of the Orthodox churches across the country, which is the majority, that won't go along with this new manufactured church. And it's a really dangerous, bloody situation. And Bartholomew, man, I don't know how he's going to sleep at night or where he's going when he dies, but it ain't upstairs.
All right. I think there's a video there for us to do. Alexander.
Absolutely.
Tweety Bird, thank you for your super chat. Alexander, what are you looking at this week ahead?
Ukraine certainly needs to be watched. I mean, there's been some talk that there might be another attack, a Ukrainian attack on the Donbass. I don't personally think it's going to happen, but it might do. This is a very fraught time in Ukraine. Assange, it's certainly possible. Christmas is coming up. A good time to drive him out of the embassy. Exactly, when people aren't really watching because they're enjoying their Christmases. I am sorry to say, and I apologize to our viewers outside Britain, But inevitably, I'm going to have to follow what is going to happen in this unending, ghastly Brexit saga that is happening here. There is now talk that there might be a parliamentary vote of no confidence in Theresa May this week. Jeremy Corbyn, importantly, is trying to resist it because he is not happy with the agenda of some of the people who's pushing it. We will see. It's a very fraught situation in Britain at the moment. The political system is in a process of meltdown. Nobody quite knows what's going to happen. I personally still think we are drifting towards a no deal, or if you prefer, a clean break Brexit in March. But it's something one has to watch, especially if one lives in Britain, as I do.
It's kind of like the Zimbabweanization of British politics. Sorry to say, Alex. Okay.
and on that note, and on the Brexit note, we will wrap up our 17th live chat. Thank you to everyone who watched. This was a great live chat. Thank you for all that you guys do for the Duran. 50,000 plus subscribers. Let's all get to 100,000 together. We need your help. So click that like button. Share the channel with everybody that you know. Subscribe, click the notifications bell to make sure you get notifications every time we push out a new video. You have to click that bell to get notified. Remember that. Guys, thank you to everybody with your questions for watching. We appreciate everything you do. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow. Mark Sleboda, International Affairs and Security Analyst, also in Moscow. And the Oracle of London, based in London. Editor-in-Chief of the Duran.
The Oracle!
The Oracle, Mr. Alexander Mercouris. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Sunday wherever you are in the world. Take care. Until next time.
Signing off.